The prison gates creaked open with a metallic groan that sent a chill down Clarissa's spine. 4 or 5 long years she had dreamed of this moment, the day the world would finally stretch wide again before her. But now that she stood at the threshold, suitcase in hand, her knees trembled. The morning sun spilled across the yard like a promise she wasn't sure she deserved. Clarissa inhaled deeply, tasting air that wasn't recycled through vents, air that carried the scent of grass, gasoline, and freedom. Her chest tightened. Freedom, so close she could touch it, yet still terrifying. A guard stepped out behind her, his voice rough but not unkind. "You're free, Clarissa. Don't waste it this time." She turned, her lips curving into something between a smile and a smirk. "Free, huh? Let's see what freedom feels like." He nodded, then walked back inside, the heavy door slamming shut with a finality that echoed in her chest. She was no longer inmate number 46721. She was Clarissa again, or at least, she hoped she could be. Her eyes scanned the parking lot beyond the tall fence. That was when she saw him. He stood by a worn silver sedan, clutching a bouquet of roses, his smile wide and hopeful. Her husband, the man who had waited through every visiting day, who had written letters that smelled faintly of cologne and coffee, who had whispered over the glass partition, "When you come home, we'll start over. Just you and me." Clarissa's throat tightened as she walked toward him. Her heart hammered louder with every step. He opened his arms before she even reached him, and when she collapsed against his chest, the world seemed to pause. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to believe this was real. She was home. "I told you I'd be here," he murmured, his lips brushing her hair. She pulled back, studying his face as if to memorize it. The lines around his mouth were deeper, his eyes a little more tired, but his smile, it was the same smile she had clung to in her darkest nights behind bars. "You waited," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You really waited." "Of course I did," he said. "You're my wife. Where else would I be?" The roses trembled in her hands as she took them, their thorns pressing lightly against her palm, almost reminding her that beauty could still sting. She pressed the petals to her nose, inhaling the sweet fragrance. It felt like a baptism, washing away years of stale air and hopelessness. He took her suitcase and opened the car door, gesturing for her to slide in. As she settled into the passenger seat, Clarissa glanced at the prison in the rearview mirror. The gray walls loomed like a tombstone. She had survived it, but part of her wondered if the walls had branded her soul forever. She didn't speak as they drove away. Instead, she stared at the horizon, the wide-open road that promised second chances. Beside her, her husband's hand found hers. She squeezed it tightly, forcing herself to believe that life could start again, that love was enough to rebuild everything broken. But somewhere deep inside, a shadow whispered, "Nothing is ever that simple." As the car hummed down the highway, Clarissa let her head rest against the window. Towns and fields blurred by, each one a reminder of the years she had lost. Yet through it all, his hand remained in hers, steady and warm. It was almost enough to silence the doubts clawing at the back of her mind. Almost. Her thoughts drifted back to the first time she met him. It was a church event, a small gathering in the community center basement. She remembered laughing at something he said, how his smile seemed to light up the whole room. Even then, there had been a gentleness about him, a patience that made her feel seen in a way no one else ever had. When she was arrested, she expected him to vanish like everyone else. Friends stopped calling. Family turned their backs. But he showed up on visiting days, week after week. He wrote long letters in careful handwriting, filling them with words she reread until the ink smudged. "I believe in us. I'll wait for you, no matter how long it takes." Those letters had been her lifeline, her anchor when nights inside grew unbearable. She remembered pressing her hand against the thick glass that separated them, tracing his outline as though she could feel his skin. "Don't give up on me," she whispered once. His voice cracked when he answered, "Never. When you come home, it's a fresh start. Just you and me against the world." That promise had carried her through the worst storms. She would lie awake in her narrow cot, clutching those words like a prayer. The guards, the other inmates, the constant noise, none of it mattered when she pictured his face waiting at the end. Now, sitting beside him in the car, Clarissa glanced at his profile. His jawline, the curve of his nose, the way he kept stealing glances at her as though making sure she was real. It filled her with something dangerously close to hope. 5 years, she said softly. And you never gave up. He squeezed her hand tighter. I told you, I'm not going anywhere. We have a whole new life ahead, Clarissa. This time, nothing's gonna break us. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to. But deep inside, she felt a ripple of unease, a whisper she couldn't quite name. She shook it off, leaning back in her seat, forcing herself to smile. For now, the promise of love was enough. The sun had already dipped low when they pulled into the driveway. The small house looked almost unfamiliar to Clarissa, though it had once been her sanctuary. The paint on the shutters had faded, and the porch light flickered weakly, but it still carried the smell of home, wood, grass, and memories. Her husband unlocked the front door with a flourish, like a magician revealing a trick. Welcome home, Mrs. Parker, he said with a grin. Clarissa laughed softly, stepping inside. The air smelled of lemon cleaner and fresh paint. He had prepared for this moment. The dining table was set with candles, their flames swaying gently, casting long shadows on the walls. In the center sat a modest meal, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and 2 glasses of red wine. Her eyes welled with tears. You did all this for me? Of course, he said, pulling out a chair. You deserve more than this, but it's a start. They sat together, clinking glasses. The wine burned her throat, but it felt good, like fire thawing her frozen insides. They talked about everything and nothing. Neighbors who had moved, new shops in town, silly gossip he'd saved just to share with her. Clarissa laughed more than she had in years, the sound strange to her own ears, like it belonged to someone else. When dinner was over, he reached across the table, taking her hands in his. His voice lowered. It's been a long time, Clarissa. Too long. Her breath caught. She understood. Prison walls had kept them apart. But now, finally, there were no barriers. She nodded, her heart racing with a mix of nerves and anticipation. They moved to the bedroom slowly, almost ceremoniously. He lit another candle on the dresser, its golden glow softening the edges of the room. Clarissa felt her pulse drum in her ears. For years she had imagined this moment, the first night back, the reunion of body and soul. When his hands touched her, she shivered. At first, it felt tender, reassuring. But then something shifted. His movements faltered, stiff, unnatural. Clarissa frowned, her senses sharpening. She reached for him, for the intimacy she had longed for. But what she found was not what she expected. Her body stiffened. The warmth in her chest turned to ice. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. She pulled back slightly, confusion flashing across her face. Wait, what is this? He froze, his eyes dark with something she couldn't read. Clarissa, please don't. Her voice trembled. Don't what? What are you hiding from me? The silence pressed in, suffocating. She reached again, desperate for answers, and the truth struck her like a knife. What she touched wasn't real. It was foreign, artificial. Her breath came in shallow gasps. No, she whispered, shaking her head. This can't be real. Tell me it's not true. He looked away, shame burning across his features. His hands trembled as he tried to reach for her again. I love you. That's what matters, isn't it? Clarissa staggered back, clutching the blanket against her chest as though it could shield her from the betrayal. Tears blurred her vision. The letters, the promises, the waiting, all of it suddenly twisted into something grotesque. You let me believe. Her voice cracked, raw with disbelief. You let me believe a lie for years. You let me dream of this moment while you hid everything from me. He opened his mouth, but no words came. The candle flickered violently, shadows dancing across the room as if mocking them both. Clarissa pressed her hands to her temples, her chest heaving. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. This wasn't reunion. This was revelation, and it shattered her. Clarissa's voice broke the heavy silence, sharp as shattered glass. Look at me. Don't you dare turn away. Her husband's shoulders slumped. For a moment, he seemed smaller, as if the weight of years of secrets had finally crushed him. His eyes glistened with a pain she had never seen before. Clarissa, he whispered, I was going to tell you one day. One day. She let out a bitter laugh that was closer to a sob. We built our marriage on letters, on promises, on hope. Do you know what kept me alive in that cell? The thought of you. The thought that I'd come home to a man who was mine. And now, her voice faltered, breaking into tears. Now I don't even know who you are. He stepped forward, desperation written in every line of his face. I am your husband. I'm the man who waited for you, who never let you face a visiting room alone. Everything I gave you was real. My love was real. She shook her head violently, retreating until her back hit the dresser. The candle flickered, throwing jagged shadows between them. Real? Real would have been the truth. You robbed me of the choice. You trapped me in a marriage built on lies. His hands trembled as he reached for her. I was born different, he said, his voice cracking. I knew if I told you, I'd lose you. I thought love would be enough to cover the rest. Clarissa's chest heaved. Every word stabbed at her like a blade. You should have trusted me. Do you understand? You should have given me the truth, not a fantasy. He lowered his head, his voice barely audible. I was afraid. Afraid you'd see me as broken, unworthy. Afraid you'd leave me like everyone else did. Her tears spilled freely now, streaking down her cheeks. You don't get it. You didn't just lie. You let me waste years believing in something that never existed. You let me dream of a life that was never real. He took one last step, his voice almost a plea. But the love, Clarissa, the nights I stayed awake writing to you, the visits, the waiting, all of that was real. I loved you with everything I had. Her body shook with rage and heartbreak, her fists clenched at her sides. Love without truth is poison, and you poured it into me until I drowned. The room fell silent again, save for Clarissa's ragged breaths. She turned away, unable to look at him, her vision blurred with betrayal. In the fragile glow of candlelight, their marriage lay in ruins, exposed, raw, and unforgivable. For Clarissa, the prison walls might have fallen away, but in that moment, she knew she had just stepped into a new kind of cage. Clarissa slammed the bedroom door shut behind her, her chest heaving as if the walls themselves were pressing in on her. She leaned against it, sliding down until she sat on the floor, her arms wrapped tight around her knees. The candlelight from the dresser still bled under the crack of the door, casting a thin, trembling line across the carpet. Her breath came in short, panicked bursts, each one clawing at her throat as though the air itself was too heavy to swallow. Clarissa closed her eyes, and in that instant the room around her dissolved. She was back in prison. The cell walls rose around her again, cold and unyielding, stained with the scratches of women who had come before her. She heard the echo of steel doors slamming, the shuffle of boots on concrete, the sharp bark of guards counting heads. The loneliness of those nights pressed down on her once more, the kind that stripped a person of hope, leaving only fragments. She remembered lying awake, staring at the ceiling, clutching his letters to her chest. His words had been her oxygen. When you come home, Clarissa, we'll start fresh. She repeated those promises to herself like scripture, the only thing separating her from despair. But now those very words mocked her, echoing cruelly inside her skull. She felt betrayed not just by him, but by her own heart, for believing, for building her survival around a man who hadn't been who he said he was. Her nails dug into her arms as she rocked slightly, whispering to herself, I survived prison once. I can survive anything. But this is worse. This is worse than the cell. In her mind's eye, she saw her younger self behind bars, clinging to a dream of reunion, of love pure enough to wash away years of shame. That younger Clarissa reached out from memory now, eyes hollow, as if to say, you fooled yourself. You traded chains of steel for chains of lies. Her body shuddered, the past and present folding into one suffocating truth. The prison hadn't let her go. It had simply changed shape. And she was trapped again, with no escape. Her mind was a storm. Every letter, every whispered promise in the visitation room, every night she lay awake in her cell believing she had a man waiting on the outside. It all came crashing down like glass shards. From the other side of the door came his voice, muffled, aching. Clarissa, please. Open the door. Let me explain. She pressed her hands against her ears. No more lies, she muttered to herself, rocking slightly. No more lies. The air felt heavy, too heavy to breathe. She thought of the prison nights when darkness smothered her like a blanket, when hope was nothing more than a flickering candle she feared would go out. She thought she had escaped that cage, but now it was back, inside her, around her, everywhere. His knock was gentle, almost timid. I love you, he said. Don't let this destroy us. We can survive this, together. Clarissa's laugh was hollow, jagged. She pushed herself up, her palms sweaty, her body trembling with fury. She shouted through the door, her voice cracking like thunder. Destroy us? You already did. You destroyed everything the second you let me believe a lie. Silence followed, deep and suffocating. Then his voice returned, softer, almost breaking. I never wanted to hurt you. I only wanted you to love me for who I was. Clarissa's vision blurred. She staggered toward the bed, clutching the blanket to her chest. Who you were, she whispered bitterly. You don't even know who that is. And you left me to build a life on quicksand. She stared at the nightstand, at the framed photo of them taken years ago at a county fair. His arm was around her, her smile wide, her eyes shining with trust. She slammed the photo face down, the glass cracking under the force. A familiar suffocating dread wrapped itself around her, the same dread she had felt in solitary confinement when time stretched endlessly, when betrayal and loneliness had carved hollows into her soul. The difference now was that the betrayal came not from strangers or the system, but from the man she had called her husband. Her voice was a broken whisper, spoken to the empty room. I traded one prison for another. From the hallway, his hand pressed gently against the door. Clarissa, he begged, please don't give up on me. I can't lose you. She closed her eyes, her face wet with tears. You lost me the moment you lied. The words hung in the air like a verdict, final and damning. The candle in the other room sputtered, its flame shrinking, just as their marriage had in the space of a single night. And in the stillness, Clarissa felt the darkness she thought she'd left behind in prison settle deep into her bones once again. The house was silent except for the tick of the kitchen clock and Clarissa's uneven breathing. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her trembling hands. Her husband's pleas had faded into quiet, but she knew he was still there, lingering outside the door like a shadow that refused to leave. Every memory replayed in her mind, faster, sharper, until the edges cut her. 5 years of devotion, letters stained with his promises, the way she clung to those words in the cold of her cell. And all of it now tainted, poisoned by a truth she never asked for. She rose suddenly, as if pulled by some invisible string, and opened the door. He stood in the hallway, his face pale, his eyes rimmed red. Relief flickered across his expression when he saw her. Clarissa, he whispered. Thank God. Please, let me hold you. Let me make this right. She stared at him, hollow-eyed, her lips trembling. You can't make this right. You stole the one thing I can never get back, trust. He stepped forward carefully, his hands outstretched. I was scared. I didn't want to lose you. But I never stopped loving you. Her chest tightened with a fury that felt too big for her body. She spun away from him, storming into the kitchen. The dim overhead light hummed as she gripped the counter to steady herself. Her eyes landed on the knife block, wooden handles sticking out like silent witnesses. Her husband followed her, stopping in the doorway. Clarissa, please. Don't walk away from me. Don't let this be the end of us. She yanked one of the knives free, the blade glinting under the weak light. The sound of metal scraping would echo through the room. His eyes widened, fear flickering there for the first time. Clarissa, no. Her hand shook, but her voice was cold. You want me to believe love is enough? Love without truth is nothing but a prison. And I've already served my time. He raised his palms, trying to bridge the space between them. I gave you everything I had. My loyalty. My heart. Doesn't that matter? Tears streaked her face as she screamed. It matters, but it wasn't real. The distance between them collapsed. He stepped forward, desperation in his every move. Don't do this. We can still fix it. Please, look at me, Clarissa. Look at me. And she did. She saw the man who had waited outside prison gates, who had kissed her through letters, who had promised her forever. But she also saw the lie, the deception that had hollowed out every memory they had built. Her voice broke. You left me nothing to hold on to but a lie. The knife came down. A gasp tore from his throat, and the room fell into a silence so thick it felt like the air had been sucked out. The knife clattered to the tile floor as Clarissa staggered back, her chest heaving, her ears ringing with the echo of her own scream. Her husband crumpled, his hand reaching for her one last time before falling limp against the floor. The candlelight from the other room flickered faintly through the hallway, casting shadows that seemed to recoil from the scene. Clarissa's knees buckled. She pressed her hands to her mouth, choking on sobs. What have I done? She whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. But there was no taking it back. No erasing the moment when rage eclipsed love, when betrayal drowned out forgiveness. The house stood still, heavy with the weight of silence. And in that silence, Clarissa knew her life had just shattered beyond repair. By morning, the small town buzzed with whispers. Sirens had pierced the night, flashing red and blue lights casting eerie shadows across Clarissa's porch as neighbors peeked through blinds. Now, word spread like wildfire. What had been seen as a story of devotion had twisted into a headline that chilled everyone: the betrayal murder. Reporters gathered outside the modest house, their cameras snapping as officers led Clarissa away in handcuffs. Her head hung low, her face streaked with tears, but flashes of light captured every angle, freezing her shame for the world to see. A journalist's voice rang out. "Clarissa, why did you do it? Was it planned?" She didn't answer. Her lips pressed tight, her eyes vacant, as though she were already behind bars again. At the diner downtown, the locals couldn't stop talking. Coffee cups clinked nervously against saucers as speculation spilled across booths and counters. She waited years for that man, one woman whispered, shaking her head. Wrote to him every week. And then this. A truck driver leaned in, his voice low but sharp. "You ask me, betrayal can break a person. Nobody knows what she went through in prison." Maybe this was her breaking point. Across the room, an elderly man muttered, "Love's supposed to be built on truth. Without it, you're building on sand." But murder? That's no answer. The church bells tolled that Sunday, but even the sermon couldn't drown out the scandal. Families sat stiffly in pews, murmuring as the pastor spoke about sin, forgiveness, and the heavy weight of secrets. Eyes shifted toward the back pew, where Clarissa's relatives sat with faces ashen, unable to meet the gazes around them. The funeral came quickly, and the tension was palpable. His family stood on one side of the aisle, Clarissa's on the other. Words weren't exchanged, but the glares carried daggers. The casket lowered into the earth as whispers rippled through the crowd, some filled with pity, others with fury. "How could love end like this?" someone asked quietly, almost to themselves. No one had an answer. The truth had surfaced, and it had claimed two lives, one buried beneath the soil, the other bound for prison walls once more. The courthouse steps were lined with reporters, their cameras flashing like lightning as Clarissa was escorted inside in an orange jumpsuit. Her wrists were cuffed, but her expression was strangely vacant, as though her soul had already resigned itself to the fate awaiting her. Inside, the courtroom was packed to capacity. Every bench was filled with townspeople who had once cheered for the couple's love story. Now they came to witness its bitter end. The hum of whispers died when the judge entered, the gavel striking sharply against the bench. "Court is now in session," the bailiff called out. The prosecutor rose, his voice cold and deliberate. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is simple. Clarissa Parker did not act in self-defense. She did not act under immediate threat. She acted out of rage at the truth her husband revealed. And in that rage, she chose violence. She chose murder." He pointed toward Clarissa, her head bowed, her hands clenched in her lap. "The victim gave her love, loyalty, and years of devotion, and she repaid him with a knife to the chest." Gasps echoed through the room. The prosecutor's words painted her not as a broken woman, but as a cold-blooded killer. When it was the defense attorney's turn, he rose slowly, adjusting his glasses. His tone was softer, almost pleading. "The prosecution wants you to believe this was calculated, that Clarissa acted with malice. But you will hear the truth. Clarissa was a woman scarred by years in prison, a woman who returned home to a secret that shattered her very reality. She was deceived, misled by the one person she trusted above all. Her actions were not born of hate, but of heartbreak. She is not a monster. She is a victim of betrayal." Clarissa lifted her eyes for the first time. Tears streaked down her face as the attorney placed a hand on her shoulder. "Love built on lies cannot stand," he said firmly, turning back to the jury. She was living in a marriage that was never what she thought it was. And in that moment of revelation, her mind fractured. This was not premeditated murder. This was the collapse of a broken soul. The courtroom erupted into murmurs until the judge banged the gavel. "Order." The victim's family sat stone-faced, their grief hardened into anger. His sister wiped her eyes, muttering, He didn't deserve this. Before Clarissa could be called, the prosecutor announced a final witness. The murmurs in the gallery stilled as a woman rose shakily from the front bench. It was his sister, grief etched deep into her face. She clutched a crumpled tissue in her hand as she stepped to the stand, her voice trembling but steady enough to pierce the silence. "My brother wasn't perfect," she began, her eyes sweeping over the jurors. "But he was kind. He was loyal. He stood by Clarissa when the rest of us told him to move on. He believed in her when no one else did. And now, he's in the ground." She paused, swallowing hard. "You've heard about letters, promises, trust. But what about his trust? He trusted her not to harm him, not to turn their home into a crime scene. And she broke that trust in the worst way imaginable." The prosecutor leaned forward, letting her words hang heavy. The sister continued, her voice cracking. "I sat in that funeral pew. I watched my mother bury her only son. And I'll tell you what hurts the most. It's not just that we lost him. It's that his love, his patience, his loyalty were paid back with a knife." She turned to Clarissa then, eyes burning through her. "You said he lied. Maybe he did. But you had a choice. You could have walked away. You could have left. Instead, you chose to make sure none of us ever saw him again." A ripple of gasps spread across the gallery. The judge struck the gavel, calling for order, but the impact of her words lingered like smoke. The sister lowered her head, stepping down slowly, her tissue damp in her clenched fist. The jury shifted uneasily, some blinking back their own tears. And then, all eyes turned back to Clarissa, waiting for her turn to speak. When Clarissa finally took the stand, the room fell silent. Her voice quivered, but her words carried raw honesty. "I dreamed of him every night in that cell. I believed his letters. I believed his promises. He was my lifeline, my reason to survive. And then I came home and discovered it wasn't what I thought. It wasn't real. Do you know what that does to someone? To feel like your whole life has been a lie." She broke down, covering her face with her hands. "I didn't plan to kill him. I just snapped. I thought I was free, but all I felt was caged again." Her sobs echoed in the silent courtroom, cutting through even the hardest stares. The prosecutor rose for cross-examination, his tone sharp. "So because you felt deceived, you decided to end a man's life? Is that your justification?" Clarissa's voice dropped to a whisper. "I didn't decide. It just happened." The jury watched, their faces unreadable, caught between pity and condemnation. By the time court adjourned for the day, the air was thick with tension. Some saw Clarissa as a grieving woman driven to madness. Others saw her as a murderer who let anger destroy everything. But everyone knew the verdict would seal not just her fate, but the legacy of a love story that had turned into a nightmare. When the judge asked if the defendant had any final words before the jury began deliberations, Clarissa rose slowly to her feet. Her legs trembled, and the shackles clinked softly, but her voice, though fragile, carried through the hushed courtroom. "I know what you all see when you look at me," she began, her eyes sweeping over the jurors. "You see a murderer. You see a woman who couldn't control her rage. Maybe that's true. Maybe I deserve to be here in this chair, wearing these chains. But I want you to know what it felt like to build your entire life on a promise, only to find out it was built on sand." She clasped her hands tightly, the knuckles white. 5 years in prison, I clung to his words. Every letter, every visit, those were the bricks I used to rebuild myself. And when I walked out of those gates, I thought I was stepping into freedom. I thought I was stepping into love. Her voice cracked, tears streaking her face. Instead, I walked straight into another prison. A prison of lies. And when I realized that, something inside me broke. I didn't plan it. I didn't wake up wanting to hurt him. But when the truth came crashing down, I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I felt was that the walls were closing in again. Clarissa paused, her chest heaving. She turned her gaze directly to the jury, her eyes burning with grief. "I am not asking you to excuse what I did. I can't excuse it myself. But I beg you to understand it. To see me not as a monster, but as a woman who lost everything the moment she discovered her life was a lie." The room was silent, heavy with the weight of her words. Even the prosecutor, lips pressed thin, seemed momentarily unsettled. Clarissa lowered her head, whispering almost to herself, "That's all I have. The truth." The jury filed back into the courtroom, their faces pale, their eyes heavy with the burden of judgment. Clarissa sat at the defense table, her hands trembling in her lap. Every second stretched endlessly, the tick of the clock on the wall pounding louder than her heartbeat. "All rise," the bailiff commanded. The judge entered, solemn and grave, and the jurors took their seats. Clarissa's attorney leaned close, whispering, "No matter what happens, hold your head high." But her body felt made of stone. The foreman stood, unfolding the slip of paper with shaking fingers. The silence was suffocating. Not a cough, not a shuffle, just the crackle of tension. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Clarissa Parker, guilty of second-degree murder." The words dropped like a hammer. Clarissa gasped, her body collapsing forward, tears spilling down her cheeks. Her attorney placed a steadying hand on her back, but it couldn't stop the sob that ripped through her chest. Across the aisle, her husband's family clutched one another, some weeping, others staring coldly at Clarissa as if the verdict had not gone far enough. The judge's voice cut through the air. "Mrs. Parker, you are hereby sentenced to 20 years in the custody of the state penitentiary. May this serve as justice for the life lost, and a warning to others who let rage consume them." The gavel struck. Final. Absolute. Clarissa's legs buckled as guards moved to escort her away. She turned her head once more toward the benches filled with townspeople. Some eyes were full of pity, others of scorn. All she could think was how quickly love had turned into spectacle, how her private heartbreak had become a public execution of her character. As she was let out, shackles clinking, she whispered to herself, "Back to the cage." The words were not meant for anyone else. They were a confession to the universe. The courtroom emptied slowly, murmurs echoing like judgmental ghosts. The people had their verdict. The law had spoken. And Clarissa's story, once a tale of love against all odds, had become a tragedy written in betrayal, rage, and irreversible loss. The prison gates loomed before her once again, tall and gray, like a cruel reminder that life had come full circle. Shackles bit into Clarissa's wrists as the guards led her through, the metallic clang of the doors echoing in her chest. 5 years ago she had walked out of this place, clutching hope like a fragile flower. Now she returned with nothing but ashes. The women inside looked up as she passed, some with curiosity, others with knowing smirks. They had seen it before, freedom slipping through someone's hands, swallowed by fate. Clarissa kept her eyes down, her steps heavy, the weight of her sentence pressing on her shoulders like iron. Her cell was waiting, bare and cold. She sat on the thin mattress, staring at the small barred window where a slice of gray sky peeked through. The air smelled the same, disinfectant and despair. She let out a bitter laugh, whispering to herself, "I thought prison was behind me. Turns out, it was waiting for me all along." Night fell, and the silence in the block grew thick. Clarissa lay on her back, replaying the moments that had led her here. The first time she saw him at that church basement, the promises written in shaky ink, the roses in his hands when she walked out free. For a heartbeat, it had all felt so real. Now, those memories burned like cruel illusions. Yet beneath the grief and rage, there was something else, a hollow acceptance. She had traded one prison for another, but this time it wasn't bars that held her captive. It was the knowledge that love, when poisoned by lies, could destroy everything it touched. Somewhere in the quiet, a voice in her head whispered the truth she had ignored for too long. Freedom isn't a place, it's honesty. And honesty had never lived in her marriage. As the lights dimmed and the cell block fell into uneasy sleep, Clarissa closed her eyes, tears slipping silently down her face. She wasn't free. She might never be. The cage had claimed her again, and this time, it was for good. That night, Clarissa sat on the edge of her cot, staring at the narrow window carved high into the cell wall. The glass was streaked with grime, the bars rusted, but through them she could see a sliver of the night sky. A bird darted past, wings spread wide, vanishing into the dark. Clarissa's eyes followed it until it disappeared, her chest tightening with something sharp and unnameable. 4 or 5 years she had dreamed of being that bird, soaring free, untethered, unburdened. And for 3 brief days, she had convinced herself she was. Now she understood, freedom had never truly been hers. Not in the cell, not in her marriage, not even in the fleeting hours when she tasted the air outside prison walls. She had traded one cage for another, until finally, she had built a cage of her own making, one no one could unlock. Her hand brushed across the concrete wall, the cold biting into her skin. "This is it," she whispered. "My forever." The block was silent, the kind of silence that pressed into the bones. But Clarissa closed her eyes and pictured the bird once more, its wings cutting through the night sky. For a moment, she let herself pretend she could follow it. Then the illusion faded, leaving only the rusted bars and the weight of time stretching endlessly ahead. Freedom was no longer a dream. It was a ghost. And ghosts don't keep you warm at night.